Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Daniela Fayer, Group Publisher for Defense at GovExec, and I'm your host today for a conversation about navigating the future of defense cloud software as a service, or SaaS. This is brought to you by Salesforce. In order to maintain its competitive edge, the U.S. Department of Defense is adapting to the rapidly evolving modern battlefield by embracing emerging technologies that provide a strategic offset. Cloud software as a service, or SaaS, enables organizations to rapidly deploy and more easily maintain applications that can rapidly analyze and transport the plethora of data being collected on and for this modern battlefield. But like all new technologies, there are policy challenges to implementation and security risks that need to be addressed in order for the U.S. Army, for example, to fully benefit from cloud SaaS. So today, I'm excited to welcome and discuss these challenges and the future of cloud SaaS with Greg Judge. He's the director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency for the U.S. Army, and Salesforce's Jim Perkins. He's the Senior Director for Defense Industry Product Management. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us.
So I'm going to just dive right in because I think the best way to introduce both of you to our audience is to start off with some questions where you can talk a little bit about the answer to that question as well as what you do in your role. So Jim, let me start with you. Could you start us off with a brief description of what you do and what you're seeing in terms of the current and future position of cloud SaaS in the DoD's ecosystem?
Of course, Daniel. Thanks again for letting me participate in this conversation today. I hope you'll see how much I truly care about this. So as you said, I'm a Senior Director for Product Management here at Salesforce, where I focus on our unclassified government cloud products. I tend to focus my time on our Department of Defense customers for a couple of reasons. First, prior to my civilian career in technology, I was on active duty in the Army for 11 years, and I'm still an officer in the Army Reserve. But also, DoD customers are kind of needy. And I like to say that if I can solve it for the DoD, if I can make it work for them, then it's probably going to work for the city of Tucson, the state of Florida, the Department of Education. So that tends to be like the underserved product community that I want to focus on. People don't normally think of like the Department of Defense as a driver of innovation, but you'd be surprised. They're pretty needy, and that drives some really thoughtful decisions around how to make better products. And so, what we're seeing within the defense market in particular is we're seeing a wide adoption of cloud SaaS products across the different services. And I think one of the things that's really telling about this, the pace of adoption, but also the breadth of adoption, it's really reflecting what you see in commercial industry and the adoption or the use of Salesforce. Much of commercial industry runs on Salesforce or other SaaS platforms. And that's sort of a testament to a lot of the business processes that make the trains run on time for companies. They aren't all that different, despite what industry you might be in. The full life cycle of HR, from recruiting, hiring to retiring, that is largely the same. And the military needs that in spades. It's a key issue right now for all the services. But then even beyond that, managing benefits for whether you're a company that's trying to do support, or if you're in the military and you're trying to do pay, HR benefits, or you're the state of California, you're trying to do unemployment benefits, it's all based on the same tech stack. And then obviously, as we talked about, cutting like IT help desk tickets and support cases like that. Again, whether you're a company that's trying to do support cases for customers, or you're the Brigade S6 for some communications unit in the Army, or somebody else that's having to do IT help desk or various other help desk related type scenarios, ticketing systems. These solutions all are built on and benefit from using the common foundation of cloud SaaS. So that's what we're seeing across industry. But really the most remarkable thing that I'm seeing from DoD customers is their sort of awe at the speed of this. Because if you're familiar with DoD, not just software acquisition, but acquisition in general, software being part of it, the cycle times here are typically like months if you're lucky, years more likely. And when you can get a SaaS solution up and running in days or weeks, it is lightning fast and just remarkable for them. And the consistent things that comes back from this is I can focus on my mission, which it talks to the heart and soul of what people come to the military to do. They want to serve a mission and not manage IT infrastructure or whatever under the hood. They don't want to have to go through that. They want to be able to say, hey, I have this problem that's impacting my mission, and very quickly have something out of the box. And that tends to be our biggest piece of feedback from our DoD customers, who are just, this is kind of a brave new world for them, and it's exciting to see that positive response.
Jim, thank you so much for that introduction. I love your passion for the project here. Greg, welcome. I'm wondering if you can highlight what some of your cloud related responsibilities are in your role, and where your office is in its cloud journey right now.
Sure, absolutely, Danielle. Thank you. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I am the the acting director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Agency. So, I want to riff off a couple of points that Jim made. Is one, the Army and the DoD in particular, we are a pretty demanding environment. We operate in environments, locales that commercial companies just generally don't execute in. And the second thing is soldiers. Soldiers are exceptionally innovative individuals, right? They will find solutions to problems quickly, and oftentimes have been known to use tools to solve these complex problems in ways that really weren't intended to do so. So I totally agree with Jim in that, in terms of innovation is happening inside DoD. It's happening every day inside the Army. You may not see it from the outside, but it certainly is one of the tenets of the U.S. Army. Now, coming back to the ECMA, in 2019, Secretary Ryan McCarthy, he was the one who really directed the establishment of this organization. And really it was to focus efforts on modernization and migration of applications to the cloud. And it wasn't really cloud for the sake of cloud. It was really, he believed that the cloud was going to be that foundational capability, that underlying infrastructure that would allow Army to harness the vast data stores that we have at our disposal. And we were going to need to use that data to train machines. We all talked about machine learning and artificial intelligence, but in order to actually utilize the algorithms and those infrastructures, you need data, and you need clean, trusted data. And he believed at the time that was the only way we were really going to be able to harness that data for the warfighting functions. So in 2021, we were established as a field operating agency within the CIO, and that gave us some latitude, right? It gave us resourcing and latitude to begin to really execute the secretary's and the CIO's intent. And we've taken that latitude and we have executed at a speed that, for those that have experience within the Department of Defense, might see as pretty darn fast. We've built up an entire cloud ecosystem at the impacts level, 2, 4, 5, and 6 today. We are scaling that into different cloud security, cloud service offerings as we speak. But what I would say is, after 3 years of operation, right, we have learned a tremendous amount, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and we've learned from those mistakes, right? We've become experts in contracting in this space. We've been able to mature environments at each one of those impact levels, and we've got several hundred tenants that are currently operating inside the cloud today. And so some of the areas that I focus on very, very passionately is cybersecurity, first and foremost, right? Cybersecurity will be the first and foremost in terms of how we operate, regardless of the maturation level of the organization of the cloud, right? We're going to be scaling what we call CARMI, our hybrid cloud infrastructure. We'll scale it. We'll be much more resilient as we mature, and we really focus more and more now on operational efficiency, right? So we're effective today. We want to be efficient now, more and more going forward. So what I would say FY24 really will be a year of integration into that hybrid cloud ecosystem, pushing cloud services further and further to the edge. You talked about some of the tactical operations before, using edge computing and using cloud services to actually provide capabilities in warfighting functions at the edge is an imperative for us. And then, as I mentioned, squeezing inefficiencies or efficiencies out of the infrastructures today. So those are some of the things that we focus on, and we'll be putting more and more effort as we grow into FY24.
That's such a great overview and introduction, Greg. I really appreciate it. I do want to dig into your organization's experience adopting a software as a service model. And then I would love to hear, Jim, from you on other client experiences around the same vein. But if Greg, you could lead us off and kind of talk a little bit about how SaaS has enhanced your capabilities and your ability to execute your mission. And then throughout this journey, what are some of the challenges that you've encountered, and how have those been overcome? You mentioned that you're learning a lot of lessons, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. I think Jim, hit on some of the really, I think the main points, right? Is that SaaS allows us to deploy tools much faster than we could procure, deploy, and administer ourselves, right? It allows us to quickly harness these tools that a lot of times we use on a daily basis at home, things like collaboration and email and chat. The basic tools we take for granted every day weren't always taken for granted in the military operations. And so we've been utilizing a lot of these tools for years today, thanks, the basic office automation products. But more and more, what we will start seeing is these types of applications being deployed out to the edge. When I say the edge, those support elements that are in what I would say supporting current operations or current exercises. You're seeing that today from using analytic tools, using logistics tools, using finance tools, using some of the what I would say advanced data analytics to help with soldiers in terms of some of the more kinetic warfighting activities. So as I mentioned earlier, it reduces the administrative burden on us, on a soldier that doesn't have to carry another piece of equipment into the field. And then lastly, what really is one of the biggest benefits that I see in my position here is it allows us to maintain coherency of software versions across the environment. So no more do we have 2 or 3 or 4 different versions of the same software label that has to be administered. Once again, that creates administrative burden. It increases costs, but also can create operational ineffectiveness. Sometimes these versions don't operate together, right? So SaaS bridges many of these types of problems that we've run into over the years. Now, with that, as you mentioned, there are some challenges, and we have run into several challenges. I would say first and foremost on the top of that list, I would say bucket that in education. So a software as a service provider, first and foremost, has to get a FedRAMP approval to work in the DoD. But the problem is FedRAMP does not equate to an authorization to operate at a specific DoD impact level. Security controls must still be implemented. They have to be tested, they have to be validated, and then they have to be authorized to actually operate in the Army networks. Companies who haven't worked in the DoD previously are often surprised that, hey, I got a FedRAMP approval, I'm good to go. We should be able to buy and deploy. It's not so fast. So it's really FedRAMP is not the end of the journey. It's really the beginning when it comes to deploying inside the Army. Secondly, what I would say biggest challenge is integration, right? Integration into that enterprise architecture that we have and that we operate, specifically the security architecture that we have, and integrating with other third-party tools, be they SaaS or be they on-prem type of deployments. Integration is probably one of our largest challenges that we run into on a day-to-day basis. I would also say things like privileged access management. How are credentials being stored and protected? You know, data. The Secretary has said many times the data is that ammunition, that fuel for future fights, right? So how we protect that data and how we ensure that only authorized users have access to that data is supremely important in everything we do. So how we can protect data inside a SaaS environment is something that we will tear apart, and we will analyze, and we will ensure that we have that we are able to operate in the way that we need to operate. Incident response, right? So what happens? What happens if there's a classified data spillage? Most of the SaaS offerings that we work with today operate in the unclassified environments or the controlled unclassified environments, right? So doesn't mean that secret level data or even higher level classification of data may inadvertently be introduced into those environments. How we are able to execute a quarantine and a data spillage event is really important, right? And that all comes back down to, and I'm going to say the big one really here is data rights and all of the issues that are surrounding data, right? So ownership of the raw data, ownership of any transformed data. These are all contractual and sometimes they're technical in some cases, but these are details that must be really carefully thought through when you're looking at how you're going to deploy a SaaS tool. So I would say the bottom line, SaaS is technically a phenomenal way to get capability into the hands of users quickly. It also has to be well thought through in a very disciplined manner in order to ensure that we are operating and securing the Army networks, as well as the Army data as it flows through each and every these information systems.
Jim, I'd love to hear any parallels that you see, you know, while you're interacting with other clients that either, you know, are similar to what Greg has described or different.
Well, it's wonderful that we're actually very closely aligned. You know, industry and you know, the government should both be, hopefully we're seeing the same things. If there's discordance, that's usually not a good thing. But we're definitely seeing that where there's a lot of delight around the capability that's coming and the speed that it can come. But there's a tremendous amount of learning and adaptation that needs to come with existing processes or the way we think through new models of using these types of IT systems. You know, some of our biggest customers in the DoD, the Air Force has been has been a strong adopter of Salesforce. We have some large customers in the Department of the Army as well. And you know, for all of the wonderful things they say about the use of the platform, they do also provide us consistent feedback about their own learnings within this. And it just reflects the growth of the Army or the DoD over these last years in adopting cloud. One of the things that really stand out to me is if you try to apply legacy models of deploying or building software when you're using cloud SaaS, it doesn't necessarily go particularly well. The platform is designed for you to have things that work out of the box, for you to have a user experience or a UI that they can toggle things because those features are built into the system. And if you're writing custom code that's going to do that same feature, it may not be as resilient as leveraging the power of the platform. And that's one part of it. The things that Greg was talking about in terms of really understanding nuances of the platform as well. these are great things where the Salesforce or other vendors, the platform can be accredited to Impact Level 4 or Impact Level 5, but understanding which features within that, or how you know, in terms of the shared responsibility for between the vendor and the mission owner, you know, what configurations do I have to make at my level in order to meet that? Because it's great to read that headline that says the platform can meet this. Doesn't mean out of the box it's necessarily doing that. There is still some requirement on you. And this is where really the more interesting parts of it, like, yes, learning experiences are great. You know, it's whether it's good or bad learning, being able to point to someone who learned that's fantastic. But to me, the more interesting thing is part of this conversation, like, how can we change policies or change you know, some of the processes that we have within the DoD to better support some of these new models of you know, data storage or you know, cloud software. Because the original way we thought through things of, like, I have a physical server, you know, and a closet in my facility where I can put all the bits on it today. I can secure it, show it to my authorizing official, and then, you know, connect it to the network. Well, that model doesn't exist anymore, or it doesn't function so well when it's a third-party cloud software as a service system that you're then having to connect to. So that's what really excites me when we think through, like, these pain points are also really cool opportunities to innovate, for lack of a better buzzword.
Yeah. Hey, Danielle, if you don't mind, can I jump in on a couple of things that Jim said? Because he had some really good points. And I think that the whole concept of really understanding the true capabilities of the tool that is available, and how do you reconcile that with requirements? I think is probably one of those areas that I have to agree with them. We have some maturation to go through, right? How we build a capability needs statement, and then align those capability needs to a specific set of functions that a SaaS offering or a custom code offering would be able to suffice, but actually do that type of rationalization and architectural assessment to make a decision as to what is the best approach. And then last thing, I think we've all heard or read the science board study about software is never done, and so that is a concept that Army is truly adopting up at the highest levels of senior leadership, is understanding that when we put a piece of software out, even if it's a SaaS offering or a custom developed piece of code, it is never done. It never goes into quote unquote sustainment like a vehicle or an aircraft might go into. The software will always be refined. When users first touch it, it'll never be right from the beginning. It's always going to undergo refinements and improvements as people use it, and then people then come back with the feedback. It's like, hey, this is great that it does this. How about this, or how about that, right? And so platforms that are easily adaptable to the user is something that has high value to us. And so if we can partner with organizations that have tools that allow us to make quick modifications to the functionality, whether that be a workflow, whether it be something as a UI, I think is high value to us, because it allows us to adapt to changing needs in the field, and allows us to provide a better product, to either to the warfighter or those in a supporting role, because we're all supporting warfighters in one way, shape, or form, right? So this is an area that I think is really a growth opportunity for anybody in the Army, or anybody who tries to support the Army, is how do we bring those tools and platforms that can really quickly change based upon sometimes day-to-day changes in the operating environment.
I really appreciate that commentary on the evolution of technology, because that's really an every moment kind of thing. And we hear often about how difficult it is to modernize legacy applications. So you both mentioned custom code, and a common statement is that there they've had to learn to leverage the platform instead of writing a bunch of custom code on top of it. So Greg, I wanted to ask you, what best practices have you seen with regard to adopting SaaS and cloud for IT modernization efforts? I think you touched on it, but just would love to dig in a little more on how you approach migrating legacy infrastructure to the cloud, which plays into this.
Yeah, that's so there are a multitude of approaches to take. And a lot of that really comes down really to a bottom-up analysis of mission need and cost considerations, right? So we balance those two out as well as we possibly can. And so we've inside the ECMA, we've developed and honed over the last 3 years a process for evaluating legacy applications for the most appropriate disposition, right? And some of those applications, the best result may be just to leave it in place, and that's okay, right? Sometimes the best approach is to lift it out of its current environment and just do a modicum of refactoring to have it operate inside a cloud environment for business or operational needs. That can be okay too. But when we look at if we're going to do a wholesale redesign of an application, that then really becomes it enters the realm of DevSecOps in terms of how we approach the problem. And this was where we really go back to iterative design, minimum viable products out to the user community, and we will continually refine those applications until it meets the user's need, that we can call it a first version, field it in production, and then start working on the revisions. Now, I say that because there's also that other, I will say it's a kind of a fork off one of the original threads, is there are oftentimes when we do that mission analysis that we can do a hybrid between some type of custom code and some type of commercial application. And so we do look at tools that are approved for use at the impact levels that we're operating at, so that we can do a SaaS first. Because SaaS, interestingly enough, in our Army is our first preference for any type of capability set. If there is a SaaS if there's a SaaS tool or SaaS offering that can fit the need, that will be the first look that we give at from an architectural standpoint and a capability development. So I mentioned earlier, speed to execution is one of our tenets of this organization, and SaaS is by far and away the fastest way to get a new capability up and running inside the environment, particularly if we already have it inside the environment, and all we need to do is either scale it, or if we need to stub it and build on additional capabilities, that is the fastest means to production. So I mean, in a nutshell, I think we have a plethora of different tools or processes at our disposal to really solve the problem. And so what I would say, we don't have a one size fits all approach. On the business side of the Army, they have a completely different set of what I would say user requirements and definitely an operating environment. In our tactical customer set, exceptionally different operating environment, as you can imagine, and requirements that really do dictate how we have to deliver a capability. I will say the latter set of customers on the tactical end, you're seeing more and more SaaS providers being able to fill niches inside their capability sets, and I think you'll see that grow much more significantly in FY24 and FY25 and beyond, as the infrastructures become robust to a point where we can deliver cloud services outside the continental US in alignment with local laws and regulations, particularly around data. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole per se, but there's challenges that are unique to operating in foreign countries, as we all know. And so we work through those intricacies and we work through those policies And we have some really good solutions that we've begun piloting, both from an exercise standpoint, but as well as in what I would say in production and in use inside the operational forces today. But what I would really say, I mean, in closing, is when we look at migrating a legacy application, I mean, the first thing that we always look at is the customer, right? Is take that first look at what does the customer really need, and what does the customer really want? And sometimes those two are very not 100% aligned, right? We always want sometimes things more, sometimes than we really can deliver. But it's from that customer centric and customer focused lens that we view the problem, and building that capability set that actually serves them in the most expeditious, in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of 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 mission effectiveness, is really how we look at it. And that drives all architecture and all technical decisions inside the ECMA and inside Sea Army.
That's great. Jim, anything to add on legacy systems? Otherwise, I'll move on.
Greg said a variety of things I would love to build on. I think we're going to circle back on one of them. That was a great point. The main thing that, from an architecture and modernization perspective, that I've seen, SaaS is a broad portfolio of different products. From where I sit in Salesforce, part of what brought me to do Salesforce was like it touches 99% of the force all the time. I used to do tactical edge computing, which was like the pointiest tip of the spear. It was like 1% of the force, but less sexy. But this is much more interesting and impactful. When it comes to IT modernization, it can be very difficult to both move to cloud and modernize at the same time. That is sort of a high stakes modernization effort. And one of the things that we have seen here at Salesforce in particular is when you sort of two-put it, but you get the modern experience first. If you move your legacy application to cloud in a sort of traditional lift and shift, but you have your engagement layer being a modern experience via Salesforce, that gives your users this sense, this feeling that they now have more capabilities than they had before. Even if the underlying database structure, for example, or the identity authentication stack, even if that hasn't necessarily changed, you are giving a tremendous amount of benefit and de-risking your modernization in that process by doing it in that way. So that's the one piece I would add on. It's pretty specific to what we do here at Salesforce.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you. I want to move on to the CCSRG, which I understand was recently updated in January of 2022. But many aspects that relate to multi-tenant SaaS, such as PKI, encryption, a few other things we could mention, were either deferred or aligned to existing policies. I'd love for both of you to address a little bit about how you're updating and modernizing, or seeing updating and modernizing security policies. I know, Greg, you mentioned security being one of your number one things that you lead with. So, when you're modernizing security policies that take into account the new areas of compliance and the security frameworks, how do you think about security when building it into your strategies for this and cloud SaaS? How do you think about DevSecOps, which you mentioned, within the context of SaaS, or low, no code environments? Greg, let me start with you, and then Jim, I'm hoping you can chime in on what you're seeing across the industry.
Yeah, that's a huge topic in and of itself, as you know, Danielle. What I would say, I'll take the DevSecOps approach first, right? So the methodology that we are striving for is to get ourselves to a point where we can have what we say continuous deployment. So we don't really do continuous deployment today, because we do have, in the way the commercial sector does, let me put it that way, because we do have gates today with respect to authorization officials and authorizing software inside the environment that it's going to be deployed in. What we have done today, working very closely with DoD CIO on this, is to pilot a continuous authorization process using our Create DevSecOps platform and the processes that we've developed and refined over several years. That is getting us what I would say closer and closer to what I would say is a true CI/CD type of pipeline for software development. What we do is we've got a authorized set of containers, an authorized set of tools, an authorized set of processes by which people can develop code. We provide what I would say the guardrails by which software development can occur inside that pipeline. And if all of those attributes, I will say, are maintained throughout the software development, the authorization process for the end code is pretty much a sign off. We've had authorizations happen within within the same day or 12 to 24 hours, which is light speed, as you know, in comparison to how software is developed and authorized in a waterfall kind of approach. So what I say, we're getting there in terms of processes, and we're getting there with respect to policies that give us enough latitude to develop software in a very secure manner. And if we develop in that secure manner, then by inference, that software will be trusted on the networks. So I would say from that perspective, we're getting much better and much more maturation going forward. Now, on some of these other, so if we're back into like the SaaS type of environment, right, we will still be under what the DoD is, our RMF processes for authorizing applications and authorizing platforms. So we will still have to be able to implement security controls and test those security controls and validate those security controls before that platform can get authorized. Now, with that in mind, having said that, if we have platforms that are authorized that have low code or no code type of capabilities associated with them, I will tell you that it's exceptionally easy and exceptionally fast to build applications and deploy them. And we're doing that today in some of the commercial platforms that are currently deployed throughout the Army and inside the Army today. So our philosophy is you secure the platform, and as long as the guardrails for the platform are not breached, then any type of code that is developed on that platform is generally much more susceptible to a very quick type of authorization to operate. So we are pushing that more and more from a policy as well as from what I would say a process perspective from migration. So for example, right, we talked about some of the modernization efforts. Low code type of applications are oftentimes much more preferred than someone doing a full up code in some other higher level language. I'll leave it at that. So I won't choose a language du jour. But it's faster. Again, it's faster. And it's actually less, what I would say, technically complex, which is generally a better solution in many cases. So it is one of, I would say, one of the tools or one of the arrows in the quiver that we use. And I think it does help us to deploy much faster. And I think policy is becoming much more aligned at the Department of Defense level to facilitate a much smoother, much faster process, I would just say, to develop and get code and get applications into the hands of users more quickly. So
Jim, how about your perspective on this?
Thanks so much, Danielle. I love this question. To me, it covers such an array of things that are exciting. Talking about DoD being a driver of innovation, and pain points being opportunities for that innovation. I think it's really important to think of how we got to the point of frustration. Like, you can't solve a problem unless sort of, is this policy a feature or a bug? And Greg said something a moment ago that in his previous answer about he expects, especially the market for cloud SaaS to grow. It sounded like exponentially over the next coming years. And Salesforce has been around for 25 years, so I don't know. Like we definitely expect to see it growing. And I hope that that's actually sort of the forward, like what needs to change for the DoD, and how can we think differently about this? Like we see this. Greg says he's seeing a bow wave of cloud SaaS coming to the DoD. So how can we get ready for it? But let's, how do we get here? The CCSRG was written in the idea of like, we want to secure the DoDIN from outsider attacks. So it was sort of like a castle and moat system. And, you take a physical server, you can then connect it once it's been accredited. And then, cloud vendors started putting out, making cloud infrastructure as a service and platform as a service available. But from most of these processes, that was basically the same. It's a mission owner, paying for time on a server that's just physically and logically not within their, their building, but it's about the same process. Like I just get a new IP address for this server and I'm going to connect it in after I've configured it by reaching out to it via the public internet. And then I'm going to connect it to Nipper. And then there's a whole bunch of other things on top of that, like a third-party marketplace for IaaS and doing CI/CD on IaaS. It's very, very similar to doing DevOps with custom code on hardware that you have. But all of this goes away when you add in multi-tenancy or abstraction, or you don't actually have physical and logical access to something because someone had to configure an IL5 cloud product, and it only has, it's in order for them to get a PA from DISA, they had to lock down all access that wasn't available over Nipper. But then DISA and a mission owner can't connect to it because the BCAP connection isn't there. So it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg problem. But so, these are the cool problems where you get to think through, like, how can we get ahead of this? And, as an outsider, a little bit looking in, I think it's fair to say that DISA has many hats, and they probably lean into their cybersecurity side, wanting to protect that moat. And I would love to see DISA lean more into being sort of like DoD's internet service provider, or being this similar to the role that ECMA plays, where they're thinking about accelerating and empowering mission owners and warfighters through innovation and the ability to access some of these cloud technologies that are out there. And so when you take like an existing process that happens to be a pain point, like connecting to the BCAP or some of these questions around multi-tenancy, now you flip it around, you say, well, how can DISA serve a role that helps expedite that by creating maybe like a more robust gateway for cloud vendors to, once a mission owner has said, I want product X, now DISA can sort of be that intermediary to help onboard them or to provide that connection point. Because if I'm a mission owner and I'm just buying licenses of cloud SaaS, I feel like my responsibility to that is exponentially lower than, if I have physical servers and, rack space in my building. It's just a very different model. And I imagine there's a variety of other ways that they can, if they start asking questions along those lines of how they can lean forward to this bow wave, it would start shaping policies and updating parts of the CCSRG in a lot of really interesting ways where, so for example, Impact Level 5 is supposed to be isolated from non-DoD. It's very, very similar to Impact Level 4, but it's all about physical isolation from non-DoD. But now you're seeing Impact Level 5 cloud service vendors leveraging other IL5 cloud service vendors within their own authorization boundary. And how do those vendors actually get access to each other's systems if neither of them are mission owners, if neither of them have, CAC authentication cards, or the, laptops that have, DoD IP MAC address or whatever, they're not logically on Nipper. They don't actually have front-end access to each other unless they have like Army reservists or contractors within their space that can do that. How do you do that at scale? these are the types of processes that I would love to see DISA or, whether it's Platform One, ECMA, others try to lean forward into, like, this is how we can really accelerate and be the tide that lifts all boats within DoD to take advantage of this particular aspect of, emerging IT. So that's where I would say the next update to the CCSRG would be well benefited.
Well, gentlemen, we certainly have covered a lot of ground in this conversation. It's been fascinating. But I'm thinking about our audience, and I want to ask both of you, what advice do you have for your fellow DoD and federal colleagues, Greg, who are also adopting cloud services and modernizing their policies, practices, and strategy? And then Jim, also, what advice do you have for our audience today? Greg, why don't we start with you?
Thank you very much. I guess at the risk of repeating myself, because we have covered a lot of ground, it's been a great experience. What I would say is a couple things of advice is we've been successful at the ECMA because first and foremost, we put the customer first. And I think Jim mentioned a little bit, customer delight. That is actually part of our culture inside the ECMA is how do we solve customers' problems in the most effective, efficient, and expeditious manner possible. The cloud may be it, the cloud may not be it, but how do we solve the problems, right? And then I would say we were successful also because we became experts at contracting right from the start. We built the right contracts to generate the right outcomes that we were looking for, both from cloud services, cloud operations, cybersecurity, and software licensing. Right? We are licensing. We are basically licensing software when we buy the SaaS offering. Right? So how we acquire that is really important, and the terms and conditions in contracts are exceptionally important to ensure you're getting what you really want and what you really need out of the vendors. Talent. You can't have one of these conversations without talking about talent. We were fortunate enough at ECMA that we were able to hire and we were able to bring on really good talent that understood the cloud, understood engineering, understood software, understood networks. So we have a brain trust that I think really understands all facets of service delivery. If you don't have that mix inside your organization, I think you're going to find that there will be you'll have some Achilles heels that will haunt you in one way, shape, or form. And then I talked about education, right? You constantly need to learn. And we talk about learning organizations. ECMA is a learning organization where we are continually pressing education. We spend a lot of time with vendors. I spend a lot of time with vendors. I want to understand their products, like from Jim's company to all of the other providers, both from infrastructure as well as software as a service. I want to understand their products and I want to understand the capabilities that they bring. Maybe we may not be able to use it today, but tomorrow down the road, that's another tool in the toolbox that we could potentially use. And then the last thing that I will really say is you must have the ability to continually monitor your ecosystem. The old site reliability engineering is still really critical in terms of scaling your operations while keeping costs under control. I mean, cloud, many articles have been written about cloud costs can increase beyond people's expectations. That is the truth. That is one of our lessons learned. I go back to one of the things that we have implemented is a financial operations or FinOps capability inside our contract for cloud services so that we can monitor the cost of every single workload that's inside CARMI at any given time of the day, week, or month. So this way we know when workloads are beginning to operate outside of boundaries in terms of cost and performance, or when workloads, aren't even being used. And we've seen those things too. So monitoring your environment is absolutely critical, both from a security, but as well as from an operational reliability and cost perspective.
That's terrific. Jim, advice for our audience.
I would like to build on two of the things that Greg just said, because they're fantastic points. First off, Greg, thank you so much for talking about talent management. I'm a giant talent management nerd within the military, and like hours and hours we could talk about this. But talent management within the most precious resource we talk about is people in the military. When you really winnow it down within the space of emerging technology or cloud or IT, whichever layer we want to look at, like those people are rare and precious few. If you only have a few of them, do you really need to be spending them to maintain your platform? Or should you be leveraging them to really focus on more of like the stuff that's really impacting the mission? That's something that I would want everyone in the audience to be considering, like how are you using your precious few resources? And then the part about cost is truly important. Costs absolutely do matter. What gets measured mattered. The cost of swivel chairing also matters. The cost of your legacy systems matters, even if you're not measuring it today. And those, even though you're seeing your AWS bill go up a little bit more because somebody keeps adding on, Amazon Textract or some other product that's adding, capability to them, like those aren't necessarily bad costs. You have to, rationalize that. And those costs are important, but it is very important that we think critically about what those costs are. And adding on to this idea of costs is risks. More often than not, I would challenge anyone to find a time when the risk of doing nothing outweighs the risk of moving to a modern cloud solution. The reason this entire industry exists is because other smart people have said, it is not my core competency to manage this capability, this tech stack. And I want to outsource that to somebody else who is an expert at this and to let them do it and to use their configuration guide to meet those security things. Those risks are important just as much as the costs are, but the people get stifled by, they see this growing bill, or they see, well, that thing, I don't understand it, so I'm going to say it's risky, too risky, and I'm not going to use it. And that paralyzing thing, I worry that I don't imagine anybody on this call is really thinking that, but that should be a mantra that we share with the wider audience of people who might be resistant to these changes. So, thanks, Greg, for teeing that up.
Yeah, so Danielle, I'm gonna foot stomp what Jim just said. So can't agree with him more on the holistic view of cost, because he articulately put that he's absolutely right. Legacy systems cost matter. The cost of swivel chairing absolutely matters, right? And so, but not just in cost, right? But that's also in terms of mission effectiveness. Having a person having to fat finger information from one system into another induces errors, induces time, latency, all negative attributes of system performance. And so, yeah, cannot agree with him more on all those points.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Greg, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and share your invaluable insights. I think we could have gone on for another hour. To our audience, thanks for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's conversation, the recording will soon be available on demand. Be sure to share it and continue this conversation with your colleagues. Until next time, I'm Daniela Fayer for GovExec. Have a great day.